Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weather grapher workshop. We're going to be making a weather grapher using a few technologies, and yeah, it should be a pretty fun workshop. And yeah, hopefully we can get it done in time and everything goes nice and smooth. So we'll be starting in just around 5 minutes just to see if anyone else wants to show up. But yeah. So in the meantime, you could get a head start and start creating a replit account if you do not already have one, or make sure you have your coding environment of choice ready. The link is REP. Also on the, I've posted a Notion document in the local workshop channel in the Discord. So make sure to have that ready on the side to be prepared for this workshop. All right, let's wait for a few more people to just show up. We'll get started in like 3.5 minutes or so. So yeah. All right, for those of us who are just joining, we'll be starting in like 3 minutes. In the meantime, just make sure you get your REPL account set up, or whatever you guys want to use for your project environment. Just get that nice and set up, just so we're ready to start coding right away. And also, just make sure to get that Notion document up and ready. That has been posted in the local workshop Discord channel in the Discord's in the DevHack server. So just make sure you guys get that ready. And if you're using REPL, the link is replit.com, replit.com. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be using just for ease of use while sharing and stuff. But you guys can use anything that you would prefer. So, anything like VS Code, that's all right. Pretty much anything up to your preference. Doesn't matter. All right, we'll get started in like 2 more minutes. And sorry if I'm being a little bit repetitive, but I just want to make sure that everyone has got the Notion doc. So whoever just joined, like, just make sure you get that Notion document up in like a window or something on your screen. Just so you have that ready when you need to actually use it when making our project. And you can find that in the local workshop channel in the Discord. All right, well, let's get started in like 1 minute. Yeah, sorry for the wait. We're just waiting for more people to just get in and start the workshop. So more people, the better. All right, starting soon, everyone. Meantime, I'm going to be getting my rep set up here. All right, we'll start in like 20 seconds. All right. So make sure you get that Notion ready and your, hopefully your REPL is also up and ready to go. All right, I think we can get started. So welcome everyone. to the Weather Grapher workshop. We're going to be working on making a weather grapher using various technologies, so JavaScript, HTML. We're going to be utilizing a web API, and we're going to be using Chart.js to actually build up the charts. So let's get started. So to complete this workshop, you should have a basic understanding of like the fundamentals of HTML, CSS you don't really need unless you really want to like go into the styling after this workshop, but don't worry about CSS. JavaScript, DOM, loops, arrays, objects, functions, and conditionals. You don't need any prior understanding of web APIs, how to make API calls with fetch, Chart.js libraries. If any of these concepts don't sound familiar to you, don't really worry about it. We'll be learning them as we go. And also make sure to keep that Notion doc handy to grab important code snippets and extra resources. You can find it in the local workshop channel in Discord. Now let's start. So before getting started, head on over to repl.it/languages/HTML to start coding. It's suggested that you make an account so you don't lose your code. Of course, you don't need to use REPL, so feel free to use whatever you normally use if you would like. But for this workshop, we'll be using REPL. I usually prefer REPL, but like the majority of this workshop is going to be through code snippets, just for you guys to have a little bit of a better experience understanding the code and what's going on exactly. And as for questions, all questions will be taken after the workshop, so feel free to ask in the Discord chat after the workshop has concluded. And yeah, we'll make our organizers and mentors. We'll try to help you as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And lastly, so once you make a Replit account, you should be able to it automatically creates a HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. So that should be good. You can delete this CSS file if you would like. But yeah, that's it for now. I'll give you guys like 30 to 45 seconds-ish to just get yourself situated in REPL or whatever coding environment that you would like, coding ID that you would like. It doesn't really matter too much. All right. Hopefully most of you have created a REPL account and have made yourself familiar with the interface or whatever coding ID you're using. So let's continue. So now in your REPL, you should have one HTML and JavaScript file. So our first step in this project will be loading Bootstrap and Chart.js. We'll be using Bootstrap to quickly style our interface and give it a clean look. And we're simply using a CDN, a content delivery network, to load Bootstrap and the Chart.js library so we can use it later. So wait, but before we get started, we should talk about what a CDN really is, right? So, or in its full form, a content delivery network. Well, a really basic explanation would be that a CDN is a network of computers that delivers content. So more specifically, it's a bunch of servers geographically positioned between the origin server of some web content and the user requesting it, all with the purpose of delivering the content faster by reducing latency. So that's their primary focus. So now I think we can get started with some code. So to begin, start by copying the following lines of code between the head tags of your index.html file. And remember, all of the code snippets that are required can be found in the Notion doc posted in the hashtag local-workshop channel in the Discord server. I'll give you all a few minutes to do this. And also, I'll quickly show you a live demo of what we're going to be making today. So let me open up my REPL on my this side. So let me click play, and I'm going to open it up in a new tab. I can close. Actually, I'll just open it up here. All right. So here's our demo for weather. Sorry if I'm looking like back and forth, but my other screen's over here. So, weather grapher. So pretty much you can put any major city that you would like. So for example, I could put in Toronto, right? So Toronto, and our start date, we can put the start date for the weather at 2020-01, and we can put our 2021, so 1 year exactly, and then we can click graph. So when we click graph, should load up. There we go. All right, so on the y-axis we have the temperature in Celsius, and then at the bottom we have all the dates and stuff. So you see an average temperature per time period on specific dates, and yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool project, and we can type in, for example, even like Los Angeles, and we can click graph, and there we go. Now we have all the weather data in a graph format for Los Angeles, and of course we don't have to use like yearly like how I did right now, but we can even do like 2020, so January 1st to January 9th in Los Angeles, and boom. So you can input any type of date that you would like, but there is a limit on how many days you can have. So you can only, so the API that we're going to be using only lets you request data from a max of 370 days at a time. So that's kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. And also, if you would like to try the demo for yourself before we even get started in coding, feel free to just view. It's right up. It's linked right on the document. So yeah. All right. Cool. Let's get back to the presentation here. So I'm hoping that everyone got the chance to copy these two following lines of code. And next, you want to add these two script tags. So these are simply some JavaScript libraries that Bootstrap requires to function. And if you want to read about everything that Bootstrap has to offer, the documentation is probably the best place to start. So now I'll give everyone like a few moments to copy and paste it. And again, sorry for being a little bit too repetitive, but you can find all the code snippets required, as well as any documentation if you would like to read more about the stuff we cover for this workshop in the Notion document posted in the local-workshop channel in the Discord server. So I'll give you guys like 30 seconds, just to like 32, maybe like a minute or so, to just paste these two script tags, and you can paste it right below, paste it right above the closing, body tag if you'd like, or anywhere. All right, I'll give you guys like a few more seconds. I just want to make sure that no one else is falling behind, and yeah. All right, let's continue. So now let's start by building the actual user interface. So inside of the body tag, let me change this. So inside of the body tag, we're going to add a h1 tag with property text we're inside of the body tag. We're going to add a h1 tag with property style that equals to text -align center, and we're going to get that h1 tag to display weather grapher with a class of empty-3. So you can see right over here, that's our h1 tag, and that's what it should look like. So this class of empty dash like text align center And this class adds like a slight margin to the top so it doesn't look too cramped on the screen. So that's pretty much the goal of that class. And after that, we're going to add a div after the header with the styling. Style equals to display flex, justify content, center, which pretty much centers it horizontally on the screen. So this div will actually hold the input fields for the city. So here you can see, and we'll hold the inputs fields for the city, start date, and the end date. So we're gonna have 3 inputs for this, right? Just like we saw in the quick preview I showed you right before. So inside this div, we're gonna add a input with the following properties. So we're gonna say type is equal to text, class is form control, and mr-1 ID is equal to city, and we're gonna put a placeholder of city name with style equal to width 200 pixels. And we're gonna repeat this. We're gonna repeat this type of input 2 more times, except replacing the ID and the placeholder attributes with the start date and the end date respectively. So just because we have 3 inputs, and yeah. So now what are these classes? So form dash control. So the form dash control basically applies some preset styling to make the input field like look sleek. And the mr-1 class over here adds like a slight margin to the right. And the placeholder attribute adds preset text to the input field when nothing is entered in it. So we also added year, the format, so like year, month, and day to the placeholder because unfortunately that's the only date format that the API will accept, which we'll see later on. And we also made the date input fields a little bit longer. So over here, as you can see, for this for the first city name, it's only 200 pixels, and then we increased it by a little bit for the other 2 fields to 210 pixels, just so that the placeholder text is able to fit since it's longer, obviously. So next after that, we want to add a button. So with a label of graph, and with attributes class equals to button outline outline primary mr-1, and on click, and we're going to get the data, and the button class adds some preset styling to make the button look sleek, and the button dash outline dash primary class adds a color transition when you hover over the button. So in the example I showed you, the color turned to blue when you hovered over it. And lastly, so we'll write the get data function later on when we touch up on the JavaScript section. So I'll give you guys like, let's say like 30 to 40 seconds just to make sure. Actually, I'll give you guys like a full on like minute or so just to make sure that we have everyone on board. All right. All right, let's give everyone like a few more seconds here just to make sure that everyone's got it. Everyone's good to go. All right, cool. All right, so now we're pretty much almost done with HTML, but we still have some stuff left to some stuff still left. So to continue, we need to add another div. So a few other things actually. So in here. So we need to first add another div, right? So we're gonna have to add another div after the first div and also center it using justify content center. And we're gonna nest another div inside with the styling position, relative width, and 140 view height, height 85, 85 view height. And so it's big enough to hold the chart. And a view height unit pretty much represents 1% of the width or height of the viewport. And then inside of this, we're going to be adding a canvas element with an ID of my chart, width and height the same as its parent div. So 140 VH, 85 VH, right? Same as its parent div right here. And the canvas will hold the chart once we add in our JavaScript. So we have to nest the canvas inside of a div for us to adjust its size. We also have to nest that inside yet another div for us to center it. And yeah, and once we implement the chart in JavaScript, you can feel free to play around with the sizing and adjust it to your liking. And also, this workshop will be recorded, so you can always go back and view the workshop again if you missed something. But yeah, let's give a few more minutes and just make sure your code looks like this, and you got all the divs properly nested and all of the classes, IDs set properly, and just make sure it looks relatively similar to this. All right, let's give a few more minutes. And yeah, I'm gonna start on the next step. All right, hopefully everyone has completed the HTML section. And if not, you can always just go back later on and just add it. So continuing on, JavaScript. So HTML, and it's time to tackle the actual hard stuff of this. So now let's set up the chart. So we're going to be using Chart.js, as I mentioned before. So to get started with Chart.js library, you want to head on over to the documentation, and you can find it in the Notion document. You'll see a starter template for us to use. So actually, I can grab it right now. So in the Notion doc, should see the chart.js documentation. Should be able to just open that up, I think. All right, there we go. And yeah, so pretty much you just want to copy this entire thing. So all the way from here to here. And you just want to copy that directly into your script, into your job script. So your script.js file on the left side of your REPL. And copy only the CTX and myChart variables, and then navigate to the script.js file on the left side of your REPL and paste those two variables in. And this code creates a chart object. So I'm going to go back to our slideshow here. So this code creates a chart object which we store in the variable myChart, and the first argument in the constructor must be a drawing context that refers to the HTML canvas element that we want to draw to, which is a CTX variable. So we want to change the CTX variable to be a let variable. So I'm going to change it to a let variable, and the ctx to a const variable, since we want to avoid using var to declare variables because of ES6 conventions. And the second argument in the constructor is an object with data that specifies how our chart will look like. And because we want our graph to start off empty, we have to do a couple of steps. So you're going to delete everything in the values in the labels array. So delete everything in there. And then you want to empty the content of the label string. So just delete everything inside of that string. And then you want to delete the background color property. So, and then you want to just replace it with the property of fill false. So pretty much what this does is it removes any shading that would be below the line in our chart. And then next you want to delete the array in the border color property and replace it with border color RGBA 255, 99, 132, 1. And this should already be there, but the border width should already be there. So it should already be set to 1, and that's all good. And we want it to be 1, so it's just the line doesn't look too thick. And that's good. All right, I'll give you all a few moments here to just make sure that your code looks like this. Yeah. All right, so hopefully most of you are done now. So again, just recapping, you want to copy everything from the starter template that Chart.js gives us. So just copy from var ctx all the way down to this closing. So just copy this entire thing. Yeah, should be good to go. And you just need to delete some of the stuff here that I explained before, and you can compare it with the code on the screen right now. So pretty much we just need to delete some stuff and add some stuff possibly, and that's it. And it should be good to continue on the next step. So I think I'll give everyone like 30 or so seconds to just make sure everyone has gotten it. All right, I think I will continue now. Head back to the slideshow. So now we're almost done with the chart. So now empty everything inside of the options object and add the following properties, not including the options property. And so the responsive true property allows the chart to resize itself with respect to its parent div. So we add an x-axis object right over here with a ticks object to describe the scaling of the graph, and the max ticks limit is 10, and that sets the maximum number of like x-axis ticks as 10. And then for the y-axis, we add a scale label object. We can then add the properties label string, temperature in Celsius, and display true, which will change the y-axis label to this thing, so temperature in Celsius, and pretty much just make it visible. And lastly, we need some padding just for styling reasons. So we did add padding 20, which adds some space between the y-axis and its label. And all these like customizable things can be found in the documentation, and you can find that in the Notion. All right, I give everyone some time to just add the properties and stuff, and as well as the objects. So just make sure you guys get that. Yeah. All right. So I'll just continue in like 1 minute or so, and yeah. And also, just as a reminder, all this code will be available afterwards. I'll share my repo as well. So yeah. All right. Hopefully most of you are done adding it, adding these different properties and stuff. So let's continue on. So now we're on to setting up the API. So for this workshop, we'll be using the Mediastat web API to get weather data. So before we go to the documentation, head over to the website on like the screen right now, auth.mediastat.net. And you're gonna have, it's also linked in the Notion. You're gonna have to register for an API key, which you're gonna need to make requests to the API. So check your email for the API key and save it to your clipboard. We'll use it for later. So yeah, just take a few moments and just do that. And once you grab the API key, you should be good to go. And I'll give you guys like maybe like 1 or so minutes just to make sure that everyone has gotten their API key and they're good to go. Also, on a side note here, the documentation for the API will be linked in the Notion doc if you need, if you want to learn more about it, more in depth. The basic idea is that the API works by retrieving data made publicly available from various weather stations. So that's pretty much how the API works. Yeah, it's a pretty cool API. All right. I think we can get started now and just continue. Hopefully everyone got their API key in their email. Should look just like a long string of numbers, I believe. Let me quickly check. Yeah, so it's a mix of letters and numbers, and just looks like a very long string of just random stuff, random letters and numbers. So yeah. All right, and we'll be using that later on. So, yep. So now, in order to retrieve weather data, we first have to search for weather stations in the city we're looking for, and then we have to pick a weather station in that city to retrieve data from. So first, add the following variables at the very top of your JS file. So station URL is the API endpoint for retrieving various weather stations in an area. And data URL is the API endpoint for retrieving data from a given weather station. So what's an API endpoint? So an API endpoint is simply a point of entry or URL for the client to receive a specific request from a web API. So these URLs can be found in the documentation. Again, all these links in documentation, other resources can be found in the Notion doc. So please make sure to get on that. Yeah, should just be able to copy paste it like before. And go here. And you should be able to just take this and just copy it right here. So really, really easy. And hopefully, makes it easy for all of you guys to follow along and understand everything more better. So let me head back to the window. So hopefully you guys added these variables to the very top of your JS file. So I think we can continue now. Now we're gonna see how we're gonna retrieve, how to retrieve a weather station. So now it's time to implement that get data function that we applied to our graph button. And just on a side note here, again, all new code segments should be placed directly after the previous code segment unless I otherwise specify to do so. So with that being said, let's start by retrieving the inputs of the city's start date and end date. And at the end of your script.js file, you're going to add the following code on the screen. So here in this code, so I'm just going to explain it a little bit. We simply retrieve the values of the inputs from the index.html file using the .get element by ID method and the .value property. So we've made this into an async function, which means that it will always return a promise. And a promise is essentially an object returned by the function to handle a fetch request. Drink water here. So for our purposes, we use it because it is always required. If the await expression is used anywhere inside the function, which we'll use in a bit. We also make it an async function because then it will pause the function until a promise is returned, which we'll need when making API calls. And also feel free to read more in depth about async or await in JavaScript. A resource has been linked in the Notion if you're interested. Also, just on a side note, according to the documentation, the start and end dates for the API request must be entered in a year, month, day format. So a detailed description of the API parameters and stuff and the response parameters can be you can find those in like in the API documentation. And for the purposes of this workshop, we won't be going into input validation. However, I recommend that you could try that as a extra thing that you can do outside of this workshop, just to expand upon your skills. So yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, let's continue. So according to the API documentation, it specifies that request must contain like a query parameter that contains the name of the city we're looking for. So to make our request URL, we can use the JavaScript URL and URL search parameters class to add a query property to the URL with the name of the city we're looking for. So the URL constructor creates an object that allows us to easily work with the parts and components of URLs. And we then modify the search parameter. We then modify the search property of the URL by using the URL search params and constructor to quickly add a query parameter with the value of the city we're looking for. Right, so right over here. Yeah, so that's going to create a URL object, and then we're going to use URL search parameters class to modify its query parameter. So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds, a few minutes to do that. And yeah, shouldn't take too long. All right. So next we can use the JavaScript fetch function to make an API request to Mediostat to get back a list of weather stations in the city we're looking for. So the first argument in the fetch function is always the API endpoint or URL. And sorry guys, give me just 1 second here. All right, there we go. Sorry, my mic was just off for a second. So the second argument, so let me just start over here. So the first argument in the fetch function is always the API endpoint or URL. If we're making an API request, if we're making an API request, the second argument is an object with some data about the request. So we have to include our API key attached to the x-API key property, so like right here, and you want to paste your API key like right there. And that's going to allow us to authenticate the request, right? And we have to nest this property inside of the headers object, which is specified in the documentation. And then the await keyword pauses the function until the promise from the API call is resolved. And then we then convert the response data to JSON format using the .json method. This workshop will cover just like some of the ways we can use fetch. One of the many ways, not some of the ways, but one of the ways we can use fetch. And you can read more and learn more about fetch. There's a link in the Notion. And yeah, you guys can take a look at that if you're interested in that type of stuff. So yeah, so let's continue here. Let's speed along. So now if we console.log data with what we have now, you'll see the response object with meta and data properties. So the meta property contains additional information about the API request. And the data property contains a list of objects, each with a unique station ID in the area. So this was taken in the Chrome browser. So yeah. So now let's get how we're going to get the weather data. So if we happen to pick a weather station without any data, we should handle it with an alert message, which is shown in the code snippet on the screen. So right here, it's going to say no data available for the city, and it's going to alert the user, right? And we can actually see that in action here, if we would like. If we go back to mine here, so you can actually type in, like for example, a really small city. So I'm from Waterloo, so Waterloo, and we do 2020-01, whatever the state. I should have stayed. There we go. No data available for the city. So Waterloo is too small of a city, so and it's not available in the API. So unfortunately, it's just gonna say that. But yeah, we have an alert message just to tell the user that there's no data available. And let's continue. So to get weather data, we have to so if there is data, we'll just always pick the first weather station in the response for the sake of this workshop. To get weather data, we have to make another API call using that specific station ID, which we'll do in retrieve data function. However, if there's no data available, the function will return false and we'll have to end the program. After that, we'll use the weather data to update the chart using the update chart method down here. So yeah, that's pretty much it for getting the weather data. Continuing. So now we're gonna work on retrieving the actual weather data. So to start, you're gonna need to first create a new async function named retrieve data with parameters ID, start and end. And the function will take in those parameters and return an object with an array of dates for the x-axis and an array for the values of the array of values for the y-axis. So this function also needs to be async because we'll be making another fetch request. So inside the function, you're going to need to create two empty arrays named x dates and y temps respectively, and use the URLs and URL search params class to create a new request URL for a specific weather station using the URL at the top of your JS file, like we did for the first request URL. And the documentation requires that the parameter names in the request have to be named station, start, and end. Right here, station, start, and end. So I think we can just give a few seconds just to get this code in and creating this async function. All right, I guess we can continue. Maybe like 10 to 15 more seconds we can give everyone. And again, if any of you have any questions at the end of the workshop, I'll be available via Discord. So just drop a message in local workshop chat, and someone should be able to help right away. All right. So, in 1 second here. So now we can add a fetch request using the request URL, and we can convert the response data to JSON format like we did before. And now if we, so after putting, adding that fetch request, we can now continue with showing how it's actually going to show up. So if you console.log the data, then you'll see an object with the data and meta properties like we saw before. So the data property contains an array of many objects, each object containing weather data for one specific data. So first we must check if there's data in this response, so which we may not get in some weather stations. So if there is, we can use a for loop to iterate through all the objects in the data property of the response object and the date to the x dates array and the average temperatures to the y temps array. The function will then return these variables in an object so we can then graph it. However, if the weather station that we use doesn't return any data, we'll simply alert the user and terminate the program for the sake of this workshop. And once you're done with this workshop, you could try to make the program loop through all the other weather stations until it gets weather data if you don't get any data from the first station. And also note that when we check if there's any data, we check both the data property as well as the TAVG property of the first object in the data array, because some weather stations may return data for other weather measurements, but not TAVG. So we need to handle that as well, right? So to iterate through the weather data, we can use a for of loop. And in the loop, a day represents each object in inside of the array that belongs to the data property. And now we just have to graph all this data that we've made, and that's it. And then we're almost done. So I'm just going to give you guys a few minutes here just to work on this. And yeah. All right, we'll continue in like 10 to 20 seconds here. All right, so let's continue now. So let's graphing the weather data. So how are we going to do that? So at the end of the script.js file, you need to create a new function named update chart, which takes two parameters. So the two parameters are input data and city name. Input data is the data that was returned from the previous function. And we want to create a constant variable named new data with a label property of average temperature in $city name, right? And we're using a template literal, which is a formatting tool that lets us easily combine strings and variables, variable names, and anything between the backticks is a string. So if a variable is needed, it can be referenced inside curly braces with a $sign in front of it. So something like that. So to load the y-axis data, and you need to add a data property with a value of input data.y temps. Since the return value from our previous function returned the x-axis and y-axis data in an object, and we need to add a fill property with a value of false. So the graph is not colored in, right? And lastly, we need to add the properties of border color. So for this one, we have the color as RGBA 255, 99, 132, 1. And we're going to have a border with a 1 to make the lines red and thin. All right, continuing. So to add this data to our graph, we need to set the first object of the datasets property in the myChart variable equal to the new data variable. And to update the x-axis, we need to set the labels property of the myChart variable equal to the input data.x dates. And then finally, we need to call the .update method on the myChart variable so the updates are made visible to the user. And you're done. So that's pretty much it. So I'm going to actually go back just to make sure everyone has gotten it, and we'll just continue on in like 10 to 20 seconds-ish. Sorry, I just went a little bit fast there. So here we're going to be adding our data to our graph. So let's make sure that everyone has this. And yeah. All right. I think I will continue now. You guys, everything will be available after the workshop ends. So if you miss anything, you can always just go back. So, and you're done. So now if you click the green run button at the top of your REPL, you should see a graph. And congratulations, everyone. You just built an awesome weather grapher project while also learning about fetch, async await, and the Chart.js library. And now let's talk about extending the project. So now it's your turn to apply what you know to make this project even more awesome. So feel free to use the resources I linked at the bottom of the Notion doc, which will provide further depth into the concepts and tools used in this workshop. Here's some inspiration on ways you can extend the project. Let's check out some examples. So the first example would be multiple data sets. So in this version, you can graph the average temperature of multiple cities, not just one. So let me see if I can pull up an example here that we've seen here. Just give me 1 second, guys. Show this. Right. And all right. See if I can bring it down here. All right. So this is an example of multiple data sets. So we can press, I think I can just open it up here. And of course, here we can have multiple data sets. So we can add Toronto, start date, we can put as 2015, end date, we can put as 2021. Or sorry, there's a max limit. So we can only add 2020. We'll just do a max of like 1 year. Yeah. looks pretty good. And we can add the data, and that's going to show up for Toronto, and we can add up for Los Angeles, and we can add the data. There we go. And that's amazing. So if we can add multiple cities, and this can be a lot more better. So next version is going to be temperature conversion. So let me see. So in this version, you can, let me just bring this up. In this version, you can convert the graph data between Fahrenheit and Celsius. So of course, not everyone uses Celsius or Fahrenheit. So it makes it more user-friendly. So let me see if I can pull up an example here really quickly. All right, so here's the second example. So we can add Toronto, and we can add a start date of January 1st and end date of January 1st. And we can graph this, and we can convert it to Fahrenheit. So over here, it's converted to Fahrenheit now, and convert back to Celsius. And there you go. So that's our second example of what you guys can do to kind of expand on this project. So the next variation, or something you could add from today's workshop, would be implementing a let's say a bar chart feature. So in this version, you can create bar charts of the monthly average temperatures by inputting a specific range of months in a given year. So let's check it out. Just open it up here, and here we go. So here's the next example. I opened it from my REPL. All right. So this one is a bar chart. So Toronto again. Set a year to, let's say, 2020 or 2021. Start month we can set to January, end month we can set to February. Graph. No, there's no data available for the city, for example. Not sure why that's happening, but let's try a different city. Plus, we can increase the ones here. All right, there we go. So it works for Los Angeles. I'm not sure why it wasn't working for Toronto, but here we go. So here's the bar charts, and that's another variation that you can do, right? Makes it look kind of cool, right? So next variation would be to extend this project would be to make an average data set. So pretty much in this version, you can add a data set to the graph that represents all the cities on the graph, right? So let's see what a variation might look like for this. Let me pop it up here. And get the code. Just bear with me for a second. All right, and there we go. So there's the average data. So in Toronto, Toronto, you got a start date 20, end date 2021. Add this data. Do Los Angeles as well. Again, add the data, and we can graph the average. And as you can see, the graph shows the average between the cities. And lastly, the last thing that you guys can do, so after average data sets, would be to do some input validation. So that's something, that's an extra exercise you can try to implement and add an input validation feature, which I mentioned before that we didn't add for the sake of time in this case. And I've also linked all supplemental resources inside the Notion doc, including a course on data and APIs, documentation of the things that we used today, and more. And remember, all these resources can be found at the bottom of the Notion document that has been posted in a local workshop channel on the Discord server. So with that being said, If you need any help or have any questions, feel free to ask in the Discord. And that's the end of the workshop, guys. Thank you all for coming in. Hopefully you ended up building something that you're proud of. And hopefully you continue to work on making this project even better. But with all that said, happy hacking. See you guys.